Crossfires and crank up the bandwidth. It's time for architecture, coffee, and ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I am here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. So, first and foremost, welcome to episode 8. Welcome, listeners, old and new. This week, I'm going to be joined by Chuck Conrad, my guest speaker, who is answering a few questions about the IT world. He's going to be doing this based off of over 30 years worth of experience in the field. But first, I want to introduce the topic and also say I had a lovely time at the ASLA conference. I mentioned last week that I was going to be going to the 2021 American Society of Landscape Architects Conference. If you are just tuning in and you probably haven't been listening to the backlog of episodes, I am actually a dual graduate student, so to speak. So I will be getting a degree in architecture and landscape architecture. So I get the exciting privilege of meeting individuals from both disciplines. And this past weekend, I got the chance to go to the conference. In the past, I've always had a conflict, normally like a midterm or a test. So this, my very last year of grad school, I got to go, and it was really worth the drive and the exhaustion a little bit. Just feeling it a little bit right now. I got to meet some amazing people, hear wonderful speakers, and see some of the best booths. If you get the chance, you should totally go. Actually, I encourage everybody to go to all of their discipline related conferences, and if you get the chance to go to other conferences, you should totally do that as well. But because of this, I'm actually finishing up the audio and recording for the episode not at my normal spot. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll all clean up nice and well, and you guys will just hear me randomly worrying about it for absolutely no reason. I'm actually recording this like hunched over in the corner right now. I imagine it looks pretty funny from the outside. And I actually ended up using a recorder during this interview, so the quality may be slightly different than normal because we were actually sitting on couches and not over Zoom. But in some situations, particularly as I hope to record a few tours I'm trying to arrange right now over the winter break, this may pop up more and more again with each episode as I learn just a little bit more about how to podcast correctly. It is going to slowly end up changing how I do the show, but that's always a good sign, right? That a podcast is evolving. So this episode, I actually ended up interviewing my dad. For those who notice the same last name, yes, Chuck Conrad is my dad. I'll go ahead and acknowledge that. While I mentioned that he has over 30 years worth of experience in IT, he also has a strong background in various other roles. He used to weld and do ironwork way back in the day, long before I was born, and has accumulated a lot of knowledge in architecture and construction through either jobs or hands-on training. More construction than design, admittedly, but he and my mom were the first to teach me how to tell the difference in like a spark plug and how to not use too much solder on my motherboards. He also taught me how to build basic constructions like I did in my last studio project, to how to frame out fireplaces and build out false walls. So when I needed someone to start the conversation about IT and architecture, as I want to move forwards possibly in the future, He was clearly my first choice because while I may have a stronger understanding in some of the areas of IT, solely to growing up with it, not all of my listeners will. And as I mentioned vaguely, I have noticed a lot of mistakes and issues in designs in schools where students don't take into consideration what infrastructure is needed to support your IT department. I'll be posting up a follow up episode next week where I will be going into a little bit more technical depth about data centers and architecture. Instead of focusing on the IT side, I'm probably going to be doing just like a little segment about what the architect needs to consider. Because, like I said, that is something that I've noticed there's a bit of a gap. So I just thought I would bring it up in its own little episode again to follow up and then, you know, compare it to how this episode spoke and where we could possibly areas of consideration. Since it is Thanksgiving break in America this week, I will have a little bit more time, so I may post either a double feature or an extra long episode. Not really sure which one. But without further ado, here's the interview. All right, thank you so much for joining us today. So, today's guest is going to be my dad, actually, Chuck Conrad, who is an accomplished IT manager, just directly taken from his LinkedIn page with an extensive experience in spearheading delivery management, design, development, and implementations in support of enterprise wide applications infrastructure and business systems solutions. Overall, together, from my experience, you have over 30 plus years of IT experience. So you are perfect today to think through and discuss IT and architecture. So, first of all, thank you once again for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being willing to be my guinea pig, especially because I know you over Thanksgiving break. So, just to get us started off, what is your overall IT experience?
Um, so I started out like a lot of people. Originally was in electronics and kind of morphed over into the IT world. Um, like most other people, I started out at the basic levels. I was actually in a factory years ago, um, building PCs for telecom applications. Then I moved into systems administration and management. Um, I've had some networking experience. I've done some software development, um, DoD work. So I've played in a lot of the aspects of IT.
So, overall, you've played in just about everything, and personally, I think you're my IT superhero that I call when I have a 911 emergency. But what do you consider the parameters of IT, or what is IT to you?
That's a tough question. IT, to me, it's how I earn my living. I got into IT because I enjoyed the challenge of a puzzle. I enjoyed solving issues, solving problems. Um, IT is kind of the background for most businesses. We're not the guys in the front. We're the guys that keep everything running, so all the other aspects of the business can function. So um, IT is a lot of things.
Would you say this is a follow up question that I didn't write down, but would you say that IT is fundamental to developing the success of a business?
I would say yes. I think people will argue with you on that, but without the job that IT does, most businesses would not be successful. Um, without the servers and the network, people can't do their jobs. The communications wouldn't be there. So I would say yes, it's a necessary part of all business worlds.
Okay, so I feel like a lot of times when we as a general society imagine IT and imagine infrastructure, we imagine like a secret room or the guy in the chair, so to speak, or that person in the high tech police van sitting out front. What what is an IT layout actually consist of?
Well, we've done away with the secret handshake years ago, and the pocket protectors are gone now. But IT, um, your IT infrastructure is the network and all the surrounding components that operate your business, your servers, where your data is stored, how you function, whether it's on site or if it's a hosted facility. But so infrastructure is basically the underlyings of the business from a data standpoint and communications.
Okay, and this is again just to kind of break it down because some of my reviewers are either architects that have no experience in IT beyond like the SOS number that they call. But what would you say? Would this be everything from like the Wi-Fi to setting up like how you call everybody? Just to pretend, I know that some of this you drilled into my head as a little kid, but
infrastructure. Um, Yes, Wi-Fi is part of the infrastructure. Wi-Fi is just a wireless version of your network. It connects through access points, which connects back into your backbone, your network, which is strung together by a series of switches and routers, which connects out to the internet. So most functionality goes through there nowadays with voice over IP. Even your communications, most of it goes through your network backbone. So yes.
okay. And so when you're talking about like Python and JavaScript and coding, like that's something we use in architecture a lot. Would you say that that's pretty small building blocks? I think as architects we find ourselves really high tech and fascinating, and then I talk to you guys in IT and it sounds like we're like building with our little toddler blocks.
No, what you're describing are programming languages. Now, programs are built of different languages. I've played in Python and JavaScript in the past. In my world, where they're used are primarily web purposes. Same with what you're doing, but there are a lot of other applications or a lot of other programming languages that do the heavy lifting for programs. You don't write too many back-end applications with either of those. At the same time, they are a crucial part of a function. You couldn't do what you do without those languages. So they're just as important as any of the other ones.
Thank you. I think that's a very comprehensive explanation that we normally don't always get. And like we've been pretty lucky in the landscape side. A lot of our professors are really heavy into it, so we do get a little bit better of an introduction. But then not all the students get that introduction.
Well, programming in IT is like any other field. You've got the truest programmers that, for lack of better terms, they're kind of programming snobs, and they think only the official languages, C++, Java. I mean, and there are 1,000 others, but they think those are the only ones that matter. But you can't do everything in those languages. You have to have all the pieces to make it work. So.
Well, getting back to our official questions, are you spending the majority of the time as an IT person with clients or providing remote support? And I'm aware that I'm very simplifying what your actual role is into some pretty small basic sentences, but just for the scope of this podcast.
It's kind of a mix. In my world, everyone is a customer of IT, whether it's other departments within our building, or it's people at our remote locations, or whoever. You're all customers. Everybody needs assistance, support, or services from the IT group. So I do actually do a combination of both remote and local, but as long as you look at it as everyone's our customer, that's a good thing.
Well, that seems to have a lot of crossover with architecture then, because we do a lot of like support with clients, but then we also do a couple of like architects will reach out to landscape firms and partner with them. And in that case, I feel like it's very similar, that idea of working with them as your clients as well, in a way. And maybe that's just pretty naive of me, but
Nope,
that's kind of how I imagine it.
Most businesses are the same. We have vendors who we partner with. We have preferred vendors because we've built up a relationship with them where I can call them, and the ones that I really trust will give me an honest read. They'll give me an honest, price, and if they can provide me a better service, they'll tell me. If not, they'll advise me to go somewhere else because they know they are a preferred vendor, they are a partner, and I will push as much business as I can to them. So it's just like your world. It's you build up your business environment and all the people that you work with on a regular basis, and that's how you get the job done.
Okay. So, throughout my life, I have always remembered you in various IT roles as a professional within that field. In general terms, without naming company names or locations, because again, this is for my thesis, so can't name drop anybody. How would you describe the differences in how an IT professional in, say, a test dummy tech position, because that was one of my favorite positions you were ever in, versus education firms or even providing general IT support or startup support for company?
Um, the politically incorrect statement was when I used to work with Crash Test Dummies, it was training me for my work in IT. It's not what I really believe, and it's just humor, but the big difference is working in with test dummies, other than when you put them in a car and send them to their death. You have a lab buildup, which is environmentally controlled, a specific humidity and temperature. You can only do your testing within certain parameters, and there's a lot more science to it. Working in IT in most businesses, obviously, it's a little more open environment. It's not as stringent from a compliance standpoint, but at the same time, it has its other challenges. The test dummies never talked back or complained. Um, you know, people usually, in all fairness, when people call IT, it's not that they want to give you a hard time. They've got jobs they have to do as well, and you have to kind of put it and keep it in the back of your mind that they're not calling you because they just want to complain to somebody. They're calling you because they're stuck and they need help. And, it is a valid part of the job. It's just, you have to kind of focus on why you're there. Yes, I've worked in many different worlds, education company being one of them. But I would say IT as a whole translates itself from many different fields. It's the same core background. Now, there's different standards that go along with it. When you're crashing cars, it's NHTSA. There's software developments, parameters. There's nowadays in the world I'm in, making sure that the customers' sites are secure so they're not getting taken advantage of financially. So it's spreads across different environments, but it's primarily the same.
So, would you say like requirements? Obviously, in a test dummy situation, you need a big room that you can put a target at the end and throw the car at.
Yes.
Um,
They won't let me do that anymore.
no, I imagine not in your current role. But when you're thinking about the IT part of it, like part of it's in this like fourth dimension, so to speak. It's like theoretically in the clouds, but part of it is physically in the layout of the car hitting the target.
Okay.
Okay, so would you say that when you're designing for IT, you should take into account that, like that physical length you need, what you need physically, or do you think architects should focus more on like the theoretical for?
I think any solution for any business is designed specific, or should be designed specifically for that business. Now, you can take a commercial off-the-shelf application and use it in most businesses. But if you're building an application or you're building an environment, you should be building it based on what the company needs are and what the company requirements are. You used the technical backgrounds of what's available, to design that solution. But any solution is built specifically for a business.
That sounds like IT is actually more flexible than probably other departments in that way. You're more used to adapting to what you have and finding the needs, or maybe it's more creative MacGyver like solutions.
We try to stay away from MacGyver-like solutions whenever possible. One-off solutions can be dangerous. There's a lot of creativity in the field, um, depending on what your business requirements and, quite honestly, budget are. That defines what you can do for the company. Um, it's like it'd be like building a house. If someone came in and says, "I want you to build a house," but you can only use 1 by 2 pieces of wood 3 inches long, you'd be there a long time. You might get something, but they all have to be squeezed in the door. Same thing with IT. You have to have the allowance to do what's required. You would have to have the budget to get it done, and you would have to have some flexibility to understand the requirements and then provide a solution that works.
Okay. So just to explain to my listeners, my dad's actually the first reason that I really liked construction and cars and everything. So he has a lot of street cred when he's comparing everything together. I know I've only focused on your IT work, but you are probably one of my best explanations and interest, I think, into building construction and design as we've built various projects over the years. So,
Well, thank you.
when that's why I wanted to talk to you about data farms and things, because we've kind of talked together over the years into data centers and data farms and things, because that's something that once I got into sci-fi, I reached into as an interest. So, you've stated in the past that on-site data rooms are going away.
Okay. Um,
Or I might have missaid that a little bit, and if so, please correct me, because this is a casual conversation type podcast.
um, the move now is everyone's going to cloud-hosted solutions. The big, large data rooms or data centers within each individual business, that's kind of going away because when you host something in the cloud, you can get the security you need as long as you research the right groups. But they also provide, a constant source of backups. They provide, power. You can get to that data from anywhere in the world because it's in the cloud. So a lot of companies are going away from the servers in the local on-prem, they call it, in the local office, to hosted solutions. You still have your bare bones infrastructure, all your routers and switches connected to all your computers and your basic network. But a lot of these services are being hosted, or solutions are hosted now. There are still a ton of data centers out there. I've been in many data centers across the country. So they are, and I'm with you, there are a lot of them like sci-fi, and they're kind of cool.
So, this is a follow-up. So I always think of, Oceans. What was the latest one? Oceans 13. Yeah, where they're talking and they're like hacking in with a secret magnet. I think is what they use to like cut it off in the phone. that's honestly what I think of sometimes. Or how many movies do we have nowadays where they like the AI technology comes to life and then takes over? But it seems like a lot of them have this idea of like you have a water element to kind of cool it off, but then over the years they lost that water element. And I know it's for cooling, but they like make it super dramatic in the filming for the water.
What you see on television is someone's imagination going, what is the wildest thing I've ever seen? Yes, there are water-cooled solutions. Most people do not have that unless you're an extreme gamer, and then you might have a water-cooled desktop sitting in your house. I've even seen some that have ice chests when they're gaming just to cool things down. A typical data center keeps the temperature at a constant 60 to 65 degrees. That varies depending on what you're running. There's constant airflow. I even have been in one data center. I won't name the company's name, but it's an old limestone mine. It's up in Pennsylvania. and they use the natural limestone underneath the servers as kind of a natural heat sink. So there's a lot of technology that goes into designing a data center and keeping the servers running cool. But again, most desktop applications don't require that unless you're doing some serious computations.
It's kind of disappointing, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, they won't let us run water to all the desktops at work, and but if you ever get the chance to go into said limestone data center, it is well worth the journey just to see what is going on in there because it's very cool.
So if you had, this is completely random and not like a trivia quiz question, but if you were designing like a plant wall, that is a really big thing right now, but that's going to increase your overall humidity in your room. Does that mean you're going to want to like keep that separate from the computers? And this is pure speculation.
Yes, water and electricity, never a good combination.
Right, but even having that element like across the way, is there like, would you just like as a whole recommend avoiding that feature?
If you have a actual server room data center, so to speak, most of the larger ones do have humidity control in them to keep out the excess moisture. They are temperature controlled. There's fire alarms and fire suppression. A true data center actually will have walls that go all the way up to the ceiling for firewalls. So yes, you probably wouldn't want your arboretum and your data center all combined in one. So
I just asked that because I actually was with a project. The person has long since graduated, but they did have a data center with like a plant wall into it, and that's what made me think of it as possibly something that we might not realize or think through all the way as architects.
On the theoretical side, all of the lighting that would be in there would probably be really good for the plants. Plants go crazy when you put like neon lights in there, or not neon, but fluorescent lights. Yes, but the moisture, you would start burning circuit boards in a very short time.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. It's not something that I.
Now if you get the long extended vines in your plants, they would probably wrap themselves around the servers due to the heat, and that would also not be a good thing, at least for one of them.
So, to follow up on all of your experience, this kind of goes into a conversation with a good friend of ours. He often sends me a list as a mechanic of things that he says that if he ever sees me design, he'll get very upset with me about. So I really wanted to follow up. Through all of your experiences, was there any particular instance of a building that you feel like just did not work for what you were trying to do?
I've never run into a building that did not work. I've run into many scenarios which require extra effort. For example, you mentioned Wi-Fi earlier. You have to take into account what type of work they're doing there. Say if it's a doctor's office or somewhere doing x-rays, you need to test around the equipment because it's going to create a barrier just for the equipment there, and when it's running. Okay, so I've also run into buildings where they put an extension on the back of an existing building, so there's a 16-inch thick concrete wall. One should never assume that Wi-Fi will transmit through a 16-inch concrete wall, because it won't. I've seen buildings that had strangely shaped little rooms so that I won't say it's impossible to get Wi-Fi to every inch of the building. It is a challenge without just having an overabundance of Wi-Fi access points in the building. So, never seen anything that it just wouldn't work, but there are challenges depending on what you're doing. If you need constant cables connected, like you want to run Cat 6 to all the locations instead of relying on Wi-Fi, again, the 16-inch concrete wall comes to mind, because you're going to be there a while if you want to drill through that. So It's just a challenge to fit the requirement for the IT backbone into some buildings.
Okay, that makes sense. So this is the general complaint section. Is my next little bit. So in involving my podcast, one area of critique of architecture and design as a whole, as the entire field, that I've noticed is that there are sometimes some complaints, even just on a Yelp review of a business, that could have been solved with maybe a 20-minute on the spot conversation with an architect. If you had 20 minutes to talk about the needs of IT or just anything in general, what would you ask an architect to include or remove?
I think the first thing would be because an architect's not only designing the structure of the building, they're also doing layouts for wiring and access points throughout the building. I think having a conversation with the architect before they deliver it as a final product to the people that are actually going to have to support and put equipment there, just to have that few moments, say, well, walk me through what you're doing. In my current job, when we start to roll out new facilities, they'll talk to IT and we'll look at what they've got planned out and we say, okay, this is a problem, we need to move our equipment to this point, or this is going to be a struggle, so we're going to have to redo the cabling and go here. So while the IT structure is not considered as important to some as the plumbing or air conditioning, it would be valid to get someone's opinion of, hey, what kind of challenges are you going to have with this? You know, if it's an arboretum and you're wanting, access Wi-Fi and stuff, it'd be nice to say, these are where the different functions are. These are the water points. These are, if there's any type of growing lights or anything that keeps it going, that can affect some communication. So it would be nice just to have a few minutes to say, have you considered this? Make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Would you say that it's different from like a landscape architect versus an architect? I know sometimes we kind of throw the parking lot into the landscape architecture.
The biggest thing there would be just Wi-Fi. Understanding what the requirements are. Do you want Wi-Fi coverage for the entire grounds, or do you want Wi-Fi coverage just for, say, 50 feet around your building? Why that's important is if you have a big garden and you're wanting people to take advantage of the entire garden, everybody wants access to their phone. It would be nice if they have Wi-Fi coverage the entire facility. Whereas if you live in, this is more of a business district, and you don't want the guys sitting on the edge of your property soaking up the bandwidth so they can do whatever it is they do on their phones for free, you would dial it back a little bit. You would have it only within your facility. So
would that change urban to rural? Like if you were in the country, you might be more willing, like less customers, I guess.
You're less concerned about how many people are going to be driving up. If it's a farm, and while it might be important for the farmer to have equipment in his barn that is Wi-Fi so he doesn't have to run cabling from his house all the way to his barn, at the same time, there's usually not a unscrupulous element that's hanging out behind the barn in their Corvettes trying to steal free Wi-Fi. So it's not as big of an issue out urban, but any connectivity, regardless if it's connected or Wi-Fi, it's always good to ask someone instead of assuming.
Okay. Well, thank you so much once again for coming to join me today. I appreciate you coming to talk and explaining all of this, especially in layman's terms, because I know that we kind of talk through a lot more simplified than what you do on your day-to-day is a lot more complex. So I appreciate you taking your time.
It's my pleasure, and the one thing I've learned in the years I've done this is if you're having a conversation with someone and you're trying to put so much detail into it to make yourself look good, then there's probably a problem. You should be having a conversation where you understand your audience and you're explaining it to them. But thank you for allowing me to join you.
Thank you once again for tuning in, and a big thank you to all of my listeners. As many of you know, this is the part of the episode where I give you a quick call to action. Please rate and review, share with your friends, your neighbors, your family, your professor, whoever you think needs just a little bit of architecture in their life. We again have a Facebook page and private group, both of which are under the same name, Architecture Coffee and Ink. I will be actually having time to update and clean those up this week, and I'm so excited. The answer to the question in the secret group, who the host is Hollywood, just like the city. And the second question is just your opinion. And I might just use it as a recommendation for the show with a little shout out. If you want to either be featured or have a case study with suggestion, or perhaps just want to share a story of your favorite design and experience, you can either find me at Architecture Coffee and Ink. The website is architectureinc.design.blog, or our Insta is Architecture Coffee and Ink. All together, one word, all spelled out, just like the email, which is literally the exact same at gmail.com. Again, thank you all so much for joining me this week. If you like it, hate it, let me know. I'm always happy to receive feedback, and I'm hoping to reach out to a couple firms again this week to see if they'll be willing to reach out, especially after I was following up with some people during the conference to get the conversation started with architects directly. If you have a suggestion, hit me up. I'm always happy to evolve, and that's my favorite part of a thesis is you always start the process at one location, and this is what you think you're going to produce, and then somehow by the end of your journey, or even halfway through your journey, you realize that whatever you produced has evolved so far beyond what you imagined, and that is okay. And that's the brilliant part of thesis, is to have that exploration. But with all that said, may your coffee mugs be full and your ink wells never run dry. Thanks.